Don't ever talk with your eyes. Be sure that you compromise. You're dead, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead and out of this world.
Long ago, in 1545, a boy named Yi Sun-sin was born in Korea. Yi didn't have much of a choice about his future profession. He was born into an aristocratic family and was destined to become an ordinary official at the royal palace. Not a particularly exciting job, which consists of constant flattery, deceit, and occasional cases of corruption. For Yi, such a future seemed extremely bleak and looked like a sign of defeat in the battle with life for his success. Fortunately, he was fond of military affairs, although it is more correct to say that at the beginning it was a hobby which then grew into passion. In any way, to many at the time, such an aspiration in life would seem rather silly, given how many times the level of corruption and indifference in the army exceeded those in the palace. In addition, Korea at the time lived quite peacefully. The only land battles took place with the nomads in the north, and at sea they sometimes had to fight with Japanese pirates. A military career meant years of sitting out your pants in some distant northern fortress, but for some reason Yi was not bothered about it. He knew what he wanted, and he was ready to do anything for it. In 1576, Yi passes the Korean state military examinations, Mugwa. 190 candidates. The first stage is the assessment of the practical skills of military affairs, mainly Korean archery. Yi does excellently on this test. The second stage is an assessment of knowledge of Confucian canons and classics of military thought. He does well on this test as well. The third stage is the assessment of horsemanship and mounted archery. Unfortunately, he is in trouble. While riding a horse, he falls and breaks his leg, at which point he applies a hasty tourniquet using willow branches and finishes his mounted archery portion. It would seem that this is an example of incredible perseverance and commitment to the cause. Unfortunately, the examiners are not impressed, and Yi fails the exams. Many in his place would have accepted the sign of fate and abandoned the silly idea of military career. But no, he applies for the second time, passes all the exams, and gets the job. Everything seems to be going great, but oh no, totally out of the blue, he was sent to a godforsaken place where the military does anything but warfare. Unlike most of his colleagues, Yi took his task as seriously as possible. Arriving at the place of service, he quickly got rid of the sloopiness of the soldiers and brought the fortress into a state of full combat readiness. During his service, Yi experienced battles defending the border settlements against the Georgian marauders and quickly became known for his strategic skills and leadership. In 1583, he lured the Chechen into battle, defeated the marauders and captured their chief Mu Pai Nai. Unfortunately for Yi and his accomplishments, very soon his superiors became very jealous of him. Funny enough, there was a tendency in Korea to sabotage and frame professional adversaries. Therefore, quite predictably, a conspiracy was developed which was led by General Yi Il. He falsely accused our hero of deserting during the battle. Consequently, Yi was stripped of his rank, imprisoned and tortured. After his release, personally I would buy myself a house somewhere on the outskirts and take up gardening, but Yi, being true to his life goals and strong belief in a military career as his destiny, applied and was allowed to fight as an enlisted soldier. And while being humiliated ordinary soldier, Yi showed incredible professionalism and courage, achieving success after success. But no one can tolerate non-recognition forever. In 1588, Yi asked that he be allowed to retire. Alas, destiny works according to its own rules, and therefore he was refused. Moreover, after a short period of time, he was appointed as the commander of the Seoul military training center. Within the span of a few months in late 1590, he received 4 military appointments, in rapid succession, with each subsequent post carrying greater responsibility than the last one. Yi assumed his new post at Yuso on the 13th of March 1591. From there, he was able to undertake a build-up of the regional navy with a series of reforms, including the construction of the turtle ships. One of Yi's greatest accomplishments was resurrecting and improving the turtle ship. The turtle ships designed by Yi held 11 cannons on each side of the ship, with 2 each at the stern and the bow. The ship's figurehead was in the shape of a dragon. The figurehead itself held up to 4 cannons and emitted a smoke screen that, in combination with its fierce appearance, was meant to be used as psychological warfare. The sides of the turtle ship were dotted with smaller holes from which arrows, guns and mortars could be fired. By this time, there was only one country that posed a threat to Korea at sea, and so the turtle ship was specifically designed to counter the Japanese ships. For example, the roof was covered with planks and spikes, the purpose of which was to prevent the ship from being boarded by the enemy. The large Japanese ship's sides were higher than the turtle ships, and thus the spikes prevented boarders from jumping down onto the roof without risking impalement. All in all, Admiral Yi made it a strategic priority to avoid hand-to-hand combat in which the Japanese Navy specialized. Okay, now let's digress from Yi for a moment and look at the geopolitical arena of that time. Since long ago, Korea has been a tributary state of Ming China. For decades, the fragmented Japan and Korea did not maintain any diplomatic relations due to the long and unrestricted plunder of Korean ports by Japanese pirates. But in 1591, under the leadership of General Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Japan was united. Of course, Hideyoshi was not going to stop there, and therefore began to plan the war with the weakened China. Plan A was to normalize relations to Korea's King Sonjo on the condition that he allowed to the Japanese army free passage through his country on its way to invade China. Korea was eager to re-establish ties with Japan, but not so stupid to ruin its relations with China. Therefore, the Japanese request was flatly refused. However, King Sonjo was concerned about Hideyoshi's plans, so he in turn sent envoys to Japan in an attempt to discover Hideyoshi's true intentions. These envoys returned with contradictory reports, and for some ridiculous reason King Sonjo chose to listen to the envoy who advised that Japan would not attack Korea. Using this information, almost no military preparations were made for the defense of the Korean peninsula, and of course out of nowhere in 1592 Toyotomi Hideyoshi gave the order to execute Plan B, or should I say, invade Korea and use it as a forward base to conquer Ming China. And now the fun part begins. Japan sent over 158,000 men to take over Korea. The first days of the war turned out to be very productive, as 7,000 Japanese soldiers who arrived at the port of Busan had the opportunity to get acquainted with the right naval commander of Gyeongsang province, Wong Yun. This fine man decided that the arrived Japanese were only a trade delegation, and therefore did nothing to prevent the invasion. A little later, Korean intelligence reported to him about another 100 Japanese ships heading towards him, which was a very suspicious number of ships for the trade delegation, but not enough to take any action. Not surprisingly, in less than a month, Japanese forces cut through Korea like a knife through butter, and by June 16 captured its capital. As the Japanese now prepared to advance further north, logistics became an issue, and Japanese transport began exploring further up the west coast of the Korean peninsula, as it was not practical to carry large amounts of supplies over land, given the rough terrain and poor state of the roads. As you already know, at the time of the invasion, the Korean naval forces were divided into regional commands with the most unexperienced and unprofessional commanders. For example, panicking after the fall of Busan to the Japanese, left Navy Commander Baek Hong ordered to destroy his weapons and stores and scuttle his fleet of 100 warships without giving a single combat. Likewise, after the fall of Dongnai, Wong Yun attempted to withdraw his 100 ships to Hansander, but encountered a group of fishing boats along the way and mistook them for the Japanese fleet. Panicked, he proceeded to destroy his weapons and scuttle his vessels. Fortunately, his subordinates were able to calm him down, but by that time he had only 4 ships left. By this time, Yi Sun-sin had hoped to combine his forces with that of Chola-Right Navy Commander Yi Yoggi. However, when orders came from the capital, he was ordered to combine with the now non-existent forces of Wong Yun instead. With Wong Yun's remaining 4 vessels, Yi Sun-sin had 39 warships under his command and 46 smaller open boats. When those ships arrived near Gyeonggi-do on 16 of June, a scouting vessel alerted them to the presence of Japanese ships anchored at the port of Okpo. Yi had never officially studied naval warfare in his limited time in the military academy, and neither he nor his subordinates had experienced naval combat before. When they entered the harbor, they found more than 50 Japanese transport ships, mostly unmanned, and their crews looting in the village. Due to smoke around Okpo, the Japanese didn't notice the arrival of the Korean fleet until it was upon them. The Japanese panicked and quickly boarded their ships in an attempt to escape, but found themselves surrounded and hemmed into the port. After encircling the Japanese, the Koreans then commenced firing with their cannons. Yi Sun-sin proceeded to bombard the trapped Japanese transport with his cannon and fire arrows until the Japanese threw their weapons and armor overboard, abandoned ships and jumped into the water. In total, 26 transports were destroyed during the bombardment. And as icing on the cake, when a group of Yi Sun-sin's men seized a Japanese ship, they were fired on by Wong Yun's ships, who mistook them for enemies. The Koreans spotted 5 more Japanese vessels that night and managed to destroy 4. The next day, the Koreans approached 13 Japanese ships at Jeokjinpo, as reported by the intelligence. In the same manner as the previous success at Okpo, the Korean fleet destroyed 11 Japanese ships, completing the Battle of Okpo without a loss of a single ship, but with only 1 wounded man. Very soon the news comes about the mischievous Japanese in Sichuan. Admiral Yi rushes to the rescue. He is getting rid of most of the small boats in his fleet and adding a recently completed turtle ship. The tactics of warfare formed in the battle near Sichuan would mostly remain unchanged throughout the war. Realizing that the Japanese must be kept at a distance due to the risk of boarding, that battles near the coast carry the danger of enemy arquebus attacks, and that the best attack is defense, Admiral Yi allocates a small part of his flotilla as bait so that the Japanese pursue and therefore lose advantage in their position. The Battle of Sichuan proves to be a complete success of this tactic, as the deceived Japanese find themselves on the high seas surrounded by Korean ships and their artillery. Superiority in firepower protects the Koreans from boarding, and an armored turtle ship rushes into the center of the battle and destroys the Japanese formation, instilling panic and disorganization. It was in the heat of the battle when the course of Korea's history changed drastically. Admiral Yi was shot by a Japanese arquebus. He died and Korea lost the war. Thank you and goodbye. Oh wait, no, he survived, right. The Korean captains were shocked, however the bullet only punctured the skin of his left arm, leaving Admiral Yi with a very minor injury. In a couple of hours, every single Japanese warship that had fought was destroyed. The Battle of Sichuan caused the Japanese command at Busan some anxiety, as the supply ships that sailed from Japan might be in danger. On July 10, at the Battle of Dangpo, Yi Sun-sin fully realized the potential of his turtle ship. He spit on military tactics and simply rammed Japanese ships on his beautiful, magnificent and powerful turtle ship. The success was incredible. Nothing could seriously harm his ship, but he was able to easily sink the Japanese flagship, and after that, with the help of the other ships in his fleet, he sank absolutely all the remaining Japanese boats. After this battle, Yi Sun-sin was joined by Yi Eogi, finally, increasing the total number of Korean warships to 51. That same day, Yi Sun-sin received a report that the Japanese fleet had been sighted near He immediately sailed towards the supposed enemy location to confirm it himself. Anchored in the harbor, there were 26 Japanese ships, including another flagship, but very soon all of them were destroyed. Then there was another small battle at Yulpo, 51 Korean ships against 7 Japanese, an obvious victory and 7 wrecks at sea, moving on. Later, after a few days, on August 13, 1592, the Korean fleet spotted the Japanese fleet of 73 vessels anchored in the Straits of Myeongnyang near Hansando. Because of the narrowness of the strait and the hazard posed by the underwater rocks, Admiral Yi sent 6 ships to lure out 63 Japanese vessels into the widest sea, and the Japanese fleet followed, of course. There, the Japanese fleet was obviously surrounded by the Korean fleet in the semicircular formation called Crane Wing by Admiral Yi. Then, with at least 3 total ships spearheading the clash against the Japanese fleet and many volleys of cannonballs, the battle ended in a Korean victory with Japanese losses of 59 ships. News of the Japanese defeat at the Battle of Hansando reached Busan within hours, and 2 Japanese commanders immediately set sail with 42 ships for the port of Angolpo, where they hoped to face the Korean fleet close to shore. Yi Sun-sin received news of their movements on the 16th of August and advanced forward to confront them. This time, the Japanese were unwilling to follow the Koreans into open water and stayed on the shore. This was the first time they didn't take the bait. In response, the Korean fleet moved forwards and bombarded the anchored Japanese fleet for hours until they retreated inland. God only knows why the Japanese were so eager to just stand by and watch their fleet burn, but in the end, 42 Japanese ships were destroyed. So, let's take a break for a moment and evaluate everything that happened. Admiral Yi, who never studied naval warfare in his life, sank 222 Japanese ships in just 2 months of war. I know how you feel, but it's best to let George Alexander Ballard speak for us all.
This was the great Korean admiral's crowning exploit. In the short space of 6 weeks, he had achieved a series of successes unsurpassed in the whole annals of maritime war. Destroying the enemy's battle fleets, cutting his lines of communication, sweeping up his convoys, imperiling the situation of his victorious armies in the field, and bringing his ambitious schemes to utter ruin. Not even Nelson, Blake, or Jean Bart could have done more than this scarcely known representative of a small and cruelly oppressed nation. And it is to be regretted that his memory lingers nowhere outside his native land. For now.
Okay, Alex, thank you, goodbye. The victory of the Korean fleet at Hansanda put an end to Toyotomi Hideyoshi's plans to conquer China. The Japanese couldn't move their troops further north due to the insecurity of the sea communication routes. The Japanese army lost its offensive initiative and began to go on the defensive, and taking advantage of this, the Korean partisans stepped up and began to attack Japanese transport en route. The grand campaign of the Japanese army to China through Korea turned into just a small war for control of Korean peninsula. After the Battle of Hansan Island, the Japanese navy remained silent for nearly a month. In mid-August, Japanese army retreated from Hanyang, the later capital of the Joseon dynasty, to Gyeongsang province. Around this time, most of the Japanese troops retreated to Gimhae to secure their munitions. In addition, following the Battle of Hansan Island, the Japanese navy retreated to Busan and focused on protecting and rebuilding their positions. Commander Yi sent spy ships to Busan port and found out there were about 470 warships there. It was believed that the Japanese were retreating to their country, so Gyeongsang province governor Kim So requested that Commander Yi block their sea route. Therefore, Yi with Wong Yun and Yi Ioki united their fleets for a total of 166 vessels. On their way to Busan, Commander Yi defeated 24 Japanese ships just for fun. And later off the coast of Busan, the United Joseon fleet realized that the Japanese navy had readied their ships for battle, and the Japanese army had stationed themselves around the shoreline. The United Joseon fleet assembled in the long snake formation, with many ships advancing in a line, and attacked straight into the Japanese fleet. Overwhelmed by the Joseon fleet, the Japanese navy abandoned their ships and fled to the coast where their army was stationed. The Japanese army and navy joined their forces and attacked the Joseon fleet from the nearby hills in desperation. The Joseon fleet shot arrows from their ships to defend and restrict their attacks, and in the meantime concentrated on their cannon fire on destroying Japanese vessels. They fired on the Japanese fleet and burned them using fire arrows, while the Japanese fired on them from above in their forts. Even with cannons captured at Busan, the Japanese did little damage to the Korean warships. By the time the day had ended, 128 Japanese ships had been destroyed. Yi Sun-sin originally intended to destroy all the remaining Japanese ships, however he realized that doing so would effectively trap the Japanese soldiers on the Korean peninsula, where they would travel inland and slaughter the natives. Therefore, Yi left a small number of Japanese ships unharmed and withdrew his navy to resupply. And just as Yi suspected, under the cover of darkness, the remaining Japanese soldiers boarded their remaining ships and retreated. As a result, thanks to Yi Sun-sin, the total losses of Japan amounted to 374 ships, while Korea did not lose a single one. At this point, Hideyoshi and his commanders became anxious. A Korean victory was already on the horizon. The diplomats were preparing to discuss the Japanese surrender, but unfortunately, people sometimes can be so stupid that they're gonna lose war even with Admiral Yi. Japanese double agent plot. Taking advantage of the many internal court rivalries of the Joseon dynasty, the Japanese devised a plan. A Japanese double agent named Yoshira was sent to the Joseon general Kim Gyeong-seo and convinced the general that he would spy on the Japanese. Yoshira played this role until Kim began believing anything he would say. One day, he told General that the great Japanese fleet would be coming on a certain date for another attack on Tao's shores and insisted that Admiral Yi be sent to lay an ambush. General Kim agreed and sent the message to Field Marshal Gwon Yul, commander-in-chief of the Joseon military, who in turn sent the message to King Sonjo. King Sonjo, who was desperate for victories to loosen the Japanese grip on his kingdom, gave permission for the attack. When General Kim gave Admiral Yi his orders, the admiral refused to carry them out, for he knew that the location given by the spy was studded with sunken rocks and was thus extremely dangerous, and also because he did not trust the words of spies. When General Kim informed the king of Admiral Yi's refusal, the admiral's enemies at court quickly insisted on his replacement by General Wong Yun and also advised that Admiral Yi be arrested. As a result, in 1597, Yi was relieved of command, again, placed under arrest, again, and taken to Seoul in chains to be imprisoned and tortured, again. Yi was tortured almost to the point of death by using simple torture tactics such as whipping, flogging, burning, the cudgel, or even the classic technique of leg-breaking torture. King Sonjo wanted to have Yi killed, but the admiral's supporters at court, chiefly the minister Jong Tak, convinced the king to spare him due to his past service record. Spared the death penalty, Admiral Yi was again demoted to the rank of a common infantry soldier under General Gwon Yul. Yi responded to this humiliation as the most obedient subject, quietly going about his work as if his rank and orders were appropriate. Funny enough, with Yi stripped of influence and negotiations breaking down in 1596, Hideyoshi again ordered an attack on Joseon. The second Japanese invasion landed in the first months of 1597 with a force of 140,000 men transported on 1,000 ships. On the high seas, Yi's successor Wong Yun failed to respond to reports from his scouts again and allowed the Japanese to land critical reinforcements at Sosang harbor for their land offensive unopposed. Without adequate reconnaissance or planning, Wong Yun decided to attack with the entire naval force of Joseon at his disposal. A fleet consisting of 150 warships operated by 30,000 men that had been carefully assembled and trained by Admiral Yi. Wong Yun left anchor at Yeoso with the fleet and sailed into waters marked by treacherous rocks, where the Japanese ambushed the Joseon fleet in the Battle of Chilchonryang on August 28, 1597. Ignorant of the strength and disposition of the enemy, one was stunned to find a Japanese fleet of 500 to 1,000 ships, which immediately closed from Lee combat, denying the Joseon ships the advantage of superior cannon fire. The exhausted Joseon sailors were reduced to fighting boarding actions while heavily outnumbered and slaughtered en masse. The Joseon fleet was decimated, with only 13 warships surviving under Admiral Bae Seol, who fled before battle was fully engaged to save the warships under his command. After the destruction of the Joseon fleet, Wong Yun and Yi Eogi fled to an island with a band of survivors, but were killed by waiting Japanese soldiers from nearby fort. The Battle of Chilchonryang was the only naval victory for the Japanese during the war against Joseon. When King Sonja and the royal court learned of the catastrophic defeat, they hurriedly pardoned and reinstated Admiral Yi as commander of the greatly reduced Joseon fleet. I mean, can you imagine such stupidity of military and government officials when they repeat the same mistake over and over again? This is a rhetorical question. Nonetheless, the war continued. After the disaster of Chilchonryang, the Allied defenses in the south began to quickly break down and the Japanese forces stormed into Jeolla province. Despite military support from the Ming, military operations on land were held with varying success and neither side was going to give up. After reinstatement, Admiral Yi was left with 13 warships, none of which were total ships. In the belief that the Joseon fleet would never be restorable, King Sonjo sent an edict to Admiral Yi to abandon the warships and take his men to join the ground forces under General Gwon Yul. Admiral Yi responded with a letter written, "Your servant still doth have 12 warships under his command and he is still alive, that the enemy shall never be safe in the West Sea." Emboldened after their victory at Chilchonryang, Japanese admirals sailed out of Busan harbor with a fleet of over 300 ships, confident in being able to defeat Admiral Yi. Elimination of the Joseon fleet would mean unrestricted movement of supplies and reinforcements from Japan for the offensive drive on land towards Hansang and beyond. After careful study of potential battlefields in October 1597, Admiral Yi lured the Japanese fleet into the Myeongnyang Strait by sending a fast warship near the Japanese naval base and luring the Japanese fleet out of anchorage. The Japanese assumed that this was a Joseon scouting ship and that pursuing it would lead to the location of Admiral Yi, giving them an opportunity to destroy the remnants of Joseon fleet. What they did not know was that they were being lured into a masterfully devised trap. There were several reasons why Admiral Yi decided on this location for battle. Myeongnyang Strait had currents, eddies and whirlpools so powerful that ships could only enter safely a few at a time. The north-south tidal flow reversed every 3 hours, limiting the time the Japanese could mount an offensive. The strait was sufficiently narrow that it would prove impossible for the Japanese to flank or envelop the numerically inferior Joseon fleet. The deep shadows of the surrounding hillsides provided the Joseon ships with concealment. On that particular day, there was also a heavy mist, dramatically reducing visibility in favor of the Joseon fleet. Therefore, despite being vastly outnumbered, Admiral Yi used the terrain restrictions to neutralize the Japanese Navy's staggering numerical advantage. The Japanese fleet of approximately 333 ships entered Myeongnyang Strait in groups. The Japanese ships that made it through were met by 13 Joseon warships obscured by the shadows of the surrounding hills, ready with archers and cannons, and the Lee-based Japanese found themselves unable to fight effectively and break through the superior Joseon ranged fire. The unpredictable current eventually wreaked havoc on the Japanese. Their ships found themselves unable to maneuver and collided with each other when the tide reversed, while also presenting a perfect target for the Joseon naval artillery. Admiral Yi was astonishingly able to rout a force that outnumbered him more than 25-1 in ships alone. About 31 of the 333 Japanese ships that entered the Myeongnyang Strait were destroyed or damaged. Joseon losses, on the other hand, were around 10 casualties and no ships lost. Admiral Yi's miraculous victory at the Battle of Myeongnyang turned the tide of the entire war against the Japanese. Again. Their ground forces on the verge of invading Hansong were cut off from steady flow of supplies and reinforcements and forced to pull back. Today, the battle is celebrated in Korea as one of Admiral Yi's greatest victories. No other engagement involving such an outnumbered fleet has resulted in such a disproportionate victory, making it the greatest achievements in naval warfare. Such a devastatingly humiliating defeat at sea once again disrupted Japanese supply lines, and many of the military leaders began to question the success of the entire military campaign. Considering the Chinese reinforcements continued to arrive, supplies were disrupted and the Japanese army was losing offensive potential, in June 1598, after Commander Konishi Yukinaga raised concerns about the supply situation and limited prospects for further territorial gains in the peninsula, 70,000 troops were withdrawn back to Japan, with only 60,000 left behind to guard the territory still under Japanese control. On September 18, apparently tired of the war and not willing to be the one to sign the defeat treaty, Toyotomi Hideyoshi died. Information about the death was withheld by the Council of Five Elders to preserve army morale. The Battle of Myeongnyang was the final naval battle in the war. A Japanese fleet of approximately 500 ships under Shimatsu Yoshihiro was assembled and preparing to link up with the blockaded fleet under Konishi Yukinaga and together withdraw via Busan back to Japan. The Korean Navy under Yi Sun-sin discovered the Shimatsu fleet anchored in the narrow Strait of Myeongnyang. Noting the narrow geography of the area, Ming General Chen Lin, who led Deng Xilong and Yi Sun-sin, made a surprise attack against the Japanese fleet under the cover of darkness on December 16, 1598, using cannon and fire arrows. As in Yi's previous battles, the Japanese were unable to respond effectively as the Korean and Chinese cannon prevented them from moving. The narrowness of the Myeongnyang Strait also prevented any maneuverability. By the middle of the battle, as dawn was about to break, the Allied fleet had the upper hand and half of Shimatsu's fleet was either sunk or captured. As the Japanese retreated, Yi ordered a vigorous pursuit. During this time, a stray arquebus bullet from an enemy ship struck him near the armpit on his left side. Sensing that the wound was fatal and fearing a repeat of the Battle of Chilchuryang, the admiral uttered, "The war is at its height. Wear my armor and beat my war drums. Do not announce my death." He died moments later. Only two people witnessed his death: Yi Hoi, Yi's eldest son, and Yi Wen, his nephew. Admiral Yi's son and nephew struggled to regain their composure and carried the admiral's body into his cabin before others could notice. For the remainder of the battle, Yi Wen wore his uncle's armor and continued to beat the war drum to encourage the pursuit. Out of 500 Japanese ships under Shimatsu's command, only around 125 were able to make it back to Busan harbor. This led to the loss of crucial supply lines that caused the inevitable loss of all Japanese strongholds in Korea. Konishi, Shimatsu, Kato Kiyomasa and other Japanese generals of the Left Army congregated in Busan and withdrew to Japan on 21st of December. The last ship sailed to Japan on 24th December, bringing an end to 7 years of war. Yi Sun-sin's body was brought back to his hometown in Asan to be buried next to his father Yi Chong. The court gave him the posthumous rank of Minister of the Right, shrines both official and unofficial were constructed in his honor, and in 1643 Yi was given the title of Chung Mugong, Lord of Loyal Valor.